Hello, and welcome to the Blessings in the Streets podcast. I am your host, Joseph B. Roberts, and I have an exciting show for you today. With me in studio is a wonderful woman. She is an author of her upcoming book, The Unfolding, and she's a woman of God and just has a really good spirit. We haven't known each other very long, but I knew that when this podcast came about that she was definitely had to be on the list of people that I had on board for us all to get to know a little bit more about. And she's been so kind to come along with us and share a little bit of her journey. So without any further ado, I would like to introduce you to Monica Grace Matar. Welcome, Monica, to the show.
Hi, Joseph. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely, absolutely. It's a pleasure to finally get to speak to you. Like I said, we've communicated over social media for several months and shared posts and things of that nature. So to actually get a chance to lock in and get to know you a little bit better, myself as well as the listeners, I think this is going to be a great treat. So thank you so much for taking time out of your schedule to be a part of this.
It's my
All
pleasure.
right. So before we jump into all of our segments that we're going to cover for today's show, I want to, of course, give you an opportunity to tell everybody a little bit about yourself. So go ahead and tell
Okay.
us a little bit about Monica.
Okay, I'll try to be fast. I am a 50-year-old divorced woman, a mother of three children, who recently, almost 3 years ago, relocated from Chicago to Tampa, just based on God speaking to me directly and telling me to move and that I had to be here, that He had legacy and destiny. So I packed up everything and sold everything, and my children and I just ventured off to Florida, not really knowing what to expect, but just obeying him. But growing up in Chicago, though, um, I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and I was a product of a single mother. She's Palestinian, and my father is black, so I'm a mixed breed. And growing up in the city, Chicago, what I learned was just like one of the most segregated places in the country. That even though it's like a melting pot of all these different ethnicities, you have like the black neighborhood, the Spanish neighborhood, the Greek neighborhood. So it was real divided. And so growing up on the north side of Chicago, I was surrounded by people of all different ethnicities, but had a really challenging time because the black side of my family and black friends or black schoolmates or people that lived in the neighborhood, they weren't really fond of me because they said that I talk like I'm white and that I think I'm better because I'm mixed. And my own the black side of my family, they did the same thing. They ostracized me. And so growing up as a little girl, I had a real battle where I was always trying to prove that I'm just me. I can't help the way that I talk. I talk like my mother, who's Arab, and I didn't think I was better than anybody. And so it's like it was difficult because it's like the whites. I didn't fit in with the white people. Didn't quite fit in with the black people. So I was always felt like this outcast. Which caused me to be, sad because I never really fit in. And I only had a handful of friends that were like, well, we don't really care what you are. You're just Monica. So I had to like navigate through that and just find my way through that. But growing up in a single parent home from the age of 8, when she left my, father, um, I really like had an epiphany one day when I was about 11, and I was like, man, I have a void in my heart, and I have a decent family, I'm healthy, I'm intelligent, I have, my life is pretty good, it's not perfect, but I feel this void in my heart. And I told my mom, I was like, I think it's because I don't know God. And I was like, and I think when I get to be older and I come to know God, then I'm not going to have this void that I feel in my heart. And so my mom was just like, she didn't know what to say. So I went back to my room and that was it. And so fast forward to years later, when I was about 21 years old in college, I went to U of I in Champaign. So like my third year of college, some people were fasting and praying for my ex-husband and I. At the time we were just dating, and they were fasting and praying that we would give our lives to the Lord. And so anyway, since they were doing this on a regular basis, we finally came to a midweek service, my ex-husband and I. And when I walk into this church, there's all these people that are dancing around and they're singing, and it was just so full of life and it was so full of love. And as soon as I walked into those church doors, I was like, I knew that that was what was missing in my life, and I knew that from that day forward I was going to serve God, give my life to Him. And I didn't know what that entailed exactly, but I knew that from that day forward my life was just going to drastically change. And so from 21 up until this point of 50, I've been walking with the Lord and going through many ups and downs and trials, and God has been growing me and teaching me. And, I've had encounters with Him and so many answers to prayer, and just God just showing Himself faithful no matter what I've gone through or what I continue to go through. So that's a little bit about me.
All right. Well, that's a lot about you. That is a lot. And actually, I want to actually want to unpack that a little bit further, because one of the things that I wanted to, of course, talk to you about, of course, was your upbringing, and you shared a little bit about that. I think that's very critical. Of course, you had the dynamic of single parent household, being raised by your mom at a very young age. And I can personally identify with that because I, as well, grew up in a single parent household, raised by my mom in Chicago. And you're exactly right. When you talk about, for those who don't know about Chicago, just it's very real about the segregation of the city. You and I grew up around the same time, age wise, and to think that in the 70s it was like that, but even in 2023, it's still that way. Where everybody is. It's very specific. It's been historically one of the most segregated places to live in the country, and even what you talked about, the dynamic of not only being a biracial child, but then living on the north side. Even to that, because it was, if you were black and you lived on the north side of town, it was the stereotype that you must think you're better than us, or you're quote unquote white acting or white talking or things like that. So totally, I understand about how you probably struggle, like you said, with that fitting in aspect of it. Now, you mentioned, of course, again, parents separate at when you're about 8 years old, roughly. So, one thing I wanted to ask you about that. How did that impact you not having your dad around in your life? Was that, I don't know if you were like, what was your relationship with your dad up to that point, and what was it like, let's just say, for the remainder of your early childhood years, dad not being around?
Um, Up until 8, actually, I write, I described some moments with my dad. Up until 8, it's like I loved my dad so much, and I thought the world of him. And I know he was a taxi driver, and so he always worked late, and I'd wait for him to come home when I'd hear him open up the door, and I'd dash out of my bed and just go and hug him, real tight around his waist. And I was little, so I hugged him around his waist, and him and I would just like dance, where I would step on his shoes, on top of his shoes, and we just have a couple moments of dancing. And then my mom would be like, "Okay, Monica, time to go back to bed." And so anyway, I really loved him. He worked really late, so I don't know how much time I got to really spend with him, because when I got home from school, he was always gone working. And then my mom was working during the day. And so, anyway, but when they split up, I was devastated. I remember praying in the closet, not knowing what was going on, but I knew that they were breaking up. And so I was like, God, please, please, like, can you keep my mom together with him? Like, please don't let her leave him. But she left him, and it turned out that she was verbally abused by him. So I didn't know this as a child. And so my mom grew up in an orphanage. She was an orphan that was pretty much abandoned by her family. And so she didn't really have a high self-esteem to begin with. And so I didn't know that my father was telling her that she was fat and ugly, and he was tearing up her college books, which, are very expensive, because he was jealous that she was pursuing her education, because I don't think he finished high school. And so he was a very insecure man. So anyway, so I was close to him, where I loved him, but then I was confused, because he would tell me, Monica, you shouldn't have white friends. You can't trust white people. And I'm thinking to myself, well, my mom's white, because she looks like a white woman. Like, she's not the typical dark Arab. She's very fair with blue eyes and, curly light hair. So I didn't know what Arab was. I just thought she was a white woman. And so I had white friends in my, North Side school. I went to Lincoln Elementary. So I had, some white friends, white neighbors. and then my mom to me is white. So I was confused because he's like, you can't have white friends. And so, and then he'd play I Have a Dream speech by Martin Luther King. We had the album, and so he'd always make me listen to that. And I was just, so anyway, so I was confused because him and his mother would always, shun me and always tell me not to be with white people. But then my mom was white, and so I was conflicted because I was like, I can't choose between my mom and my dad. Why should I be asked to, But
Mm.
anyway, but once he left, though, I was devastated because from that point on, she left him for this sweet talking man that she met in college because, like I said, she didn't have a self-esteem. So this man is telling her she's beautiful and she's this. And so anyway, so as soon as she leaves my dad, he immediately comes and moves in with us, and he's like this tall, light complected guy that looks like Lionel Richie. He's like Puerto Rican and black and whatever. So he comes and he moves in with us, and my father just, from that point on, he just left my sister and I, and he would only call us once a year. He wouldn't pay child support. We stopped seeing him. We stopped seeing the whole side of his family. And then from that point, I met the Arabic side of my family. Once my mom left him, then I finally met the Arab side, but I completely lost touch with the black side of the family because he just abandoned us from that point. So that was
Wow.
really hard because I was just like, well, why can't, why did our dad leave us? He went and married another woman and raised her children and had a baby with her, but then he forgot about me and my sister. And so I was hurt, I was resentful. I saw my mom struggling as a single parent. I couldn't understand like why he wouldn't give money or do anything to support us, and just not have a relationship with my sister and I.
Hmm. And is your sister younger than you, older than you?
She's, yeah, exactly 4 years younger.
Okay. Okay.
Hmm.
Wow. Yeah. I always am interested when I hear, women speak to their fathers not being in their lives, because being a father of a daughter of my own, I just
Hmm.
can't imagine not being there. Even if me and her mom didn't work out, I couldn't imagine not having that relationship. So when I hear things like that, it's not so much about condemning a particular person one way or another, but I'm just just curious as to, as you stated, how that impacts you, because I know how close my daughter and I are, and just the idea of that no longer being in existence anymore, and then to just purposely not have the connection, like just refuse to talk to you, refuse to see you, that just blows me away. So so I appreciate you sharing that. I'm sure that's not easy to discuss, but clearly you were able to, in spite of the challenge of not having dad around, the challenge of being in a single parent home and watching your mom struggle and things of that nature, you obviously were able to navigate through that. And I like the fact that you identified the need for God in your life at a very early age. It is interesting, however, you recognized it at an early age, but it wasn't, like you said, it wasn't until you had the college experience to where it really became full blown, and you said, okay, I need to do this. Where you said you went to the church service and you knew then that, hey, I need to give my life to Christ, and you've been living that way ever since. It was almost as if God was preparing you through, in the midst of the storms, preparing you to receive and lean on Him for that strength, for that understanding, for that courage that you're going to need to overcome other challenges and things that will come about in your life. So that's an awesome story for that, and just from childhood, just for starters. So with that said, that leads me to my next question. In that life journey that we go on, as you've already stated, we're going to run into a number of different bumps and lumps along the way, but there's going to be some instances that we come across, some challenges that we come across that are going to be a little bit more heavier than others. Something that we might not feel like, I don't know if I can get through this. I don't know if this is something that's too much for me. So my question to you is, I'd like for you to share with us a time in your life where you felt like you were in that type of situation, where there was this moment that you were up against, that of all the things that you've been able to get through and overcome, this just felt different to the point where you weren't sure if you were going to make it out of this, but it was there. You found yourself in the midst of it, and now you were faced with having to take it on head on. Tell us about what that was, what that journey was like for you, and how did you actually navigate your way through it?
Okay. I guess it would be, um, After I got saved at 21, I went on to get married to my ex-husband at 23 after I graduated. And we prayed and we fasted and we were really seeking God because we're like, God, if you have someone else, we want your perfect will. So as much as we love each other, we love you more. We want your perfect will. If you say this isn't the one, then we were willing to go our separate ways. So we really prayed and fasted and really sought the Lord. And we just kept getting all these confirmations from these different random people that didn't know that we were praying about it. So anyway, so I got the green light. We got married when I was 23, and we went through all kinds of issues. But the one that sticks out to me that I'm going to share is that um, it was like it turned out to be a really toxic and abusive marriage, even though we were both Christians. We were both going to church, praying, reading the word, all that. But it's just he had all these different issues that he didn't really work through. And I just thought, we were so naive. We thought that when we came to Christ that, you know it's going to be gumdrops and rainbows and lollipops. And so I just thought that God would just take care of all of that stuff from our past. And I didn't really know that you had to go through therapy and really heal from these traumas. So anyway, so with that being said, fast forward to about 2011, I finally break free and I get I leave my husband and I leave, or we separate and then we get a divorce. But then at this point, we lived on the west side of Chicago, Lawndale, which is probably one of the worst areas in Chicago. But we built a brand new home with this Christian home building program, and so we lived on the west side for 7 years. And so even though we had this beautiful home that was all brand new, we couldn't do anything. Like my kids couldn't play outside. It was like we were prisoners in our house. And so anyway, so then once I got a divorce. Um, I moved to Oak Park because I was like, well, I want my children to live in a nice community and they're able to walk to school. Because being a single mom, I was like, I couldn't drive them from the south side to the north side and just, run around like a chicken with my head cut off, just trying to pick up and drop off. So anyway, so I was like, I want to live in Oak Park. They can walk to school. They'll have a nice little community. They'll have friends. And so I just wanted them to have that. So we moved to Oak Park, and my home on the west side, I rented it out and I made it Section 8. And so I was every year, doing maintenance on it and keeping it up to code because Section 8 is extremely picky that any little thing you can lose your voucher and whatever. So anyway, so that was like my income coming in was from that home. So that income that I got from that helped me pay my super expensive rent in Oak Park. Like it was ridiculous, but it was in a wonderful neighborhood, wonderful school. So I made the sacrifice. So anyway, so I had this rental income, and then I'm also like I've been in the credit card processing business where I do merchant card services. So I get like a residual income from all the accounts that I have, all the business owners that I help out. So anyway, so at this point, I it's like maybe 20, what year is it? I'm living in Oak Park for some years, and all of a sudden I lose the Section 8. They wouldn't approve me when I made my repair. I had to repair like a window. Um, my ex-husband got laid off, so his child support stopped. And then my business that I had, it went through like they broke off and created a different company, and so I lost all my accounts. So basically, I had no income coming in. So I'm falling behind on my rent, and I end up owing $8,000 because the rent there was maybe 1,700 a month. So, anyways, after some months, it accumulated to 8,000. And at the time, I was just like, God, I don't want to be homeless. Like, we need a miracle. And I reached out to my ex-husband. I was like, can you file your tax returns for the past few years? Because he stopped filing because he didn't want me to get the money because he owed so much in back child support that his income tax check would always come straight to my bank account. So he just stopped filing so that we wouldn't get the money. So I was desperate. I was like, can you just file for the last couple of years? We could catch up on rent. And he's like, no, Monica, that's your problem and you don't know how to handle your money and blah, blah, blah. And that's, whatever. And I was like, but you're going to let your kids and I just be homeless because you refuse to file your tax return when the government's just keeping it. It's not like you're ever going to get it, but you'd rather them keep it than give it to us. And so anyway, he refused. I was devastated. I was praying. I was like, God, I need a miracle because we got we had an eviction notice and I had to go to court for eviction. And I was like, God, I don't want to be homeless. I don't want to go and live with my mom in on the north side of Chicago when my kids go to school here. And I had three children. It was just like, it was just such a trying time. But I sought like a organization that helps tenants. I think it was called something tenant union or something like that, attorneys. So anyway, I was like, God, I need a miracle. So I was like, I don't want this to mess up my credit, because to have an eviction on your credit, then you can't get another place to rent. And so anyway, so what happened was, um, God did a miracle for me where the attorneys, they had me take pictures of the place, and it was a really old building, and it had all these different violations, like, yeah, health code violations. And so anyway, so when the attorney presented all that to the judge, they just dropped it. They're like, okay, as long as you leave by the end of the month, we won't put it on your record. You won't be evicted. And so anyway, a miracle happened where $8,000 was forgiven. It wasn't on my credit report. An eviction wasn't on my credit report. And then now at this point, I was like, okay, God, now I still need a new place to live, because we got to pack up and go somewhere. We didn't know where to go. So then right next door to me was this organization called Hepzibah, and Hepzibah is like an orphanage in Oak Park that helps orphans. But they had like a single mother's fund. And so they gave me money to move. They gave me money for my first month security deposit for a new place to live. And they helped me find a new place. And so I had the security deposit, the first month rent, and the moving costs all covered. And then we were able to stay in Oak Park, and then we got a brand new start. And the rent was like $500 less a month, so I was able to afford it. And God just, like, that was just one of the many things where He came through at such a dark time when I had no income coming in. It was completely cut off, but God still provided, and He not only provided, but He completely wiped out my debt where it was never even on my record.
Wow,
Yeah.
wow. That that is a testimony for you right there.
Yeah.
That's just another reminder that God is good. Just the whole. I love this story because obviously, I'm sure you didn't get into marriage thinking that it was not gonna be a happily ever after type thing, but then for it to break off the way that it did, for you to be in the situation with the home, like you talked about, it was a toxic environment. You had this beautiful home, but it was toxic in nature. But then your divorce happens, and yet the very place that was toxic to you initially served as an income generation for you in terms of rental income.
Yes.
So again, that was a scenario of God taking the negative and flipping that thing over and making it a positive for you, allowing you to have income generated for a period of time, and things were going well. Like I said, you were sustaining on your own. But then, and I'm just a believer of this, and I would guess that you are as well. God sometimes has to remind us that He still wants to have that connection with us. He still wants us to lean on Him, and so sometimes what He will do is He will allow the walls to sort of cave in on you, just so that you don't get so much to thinking of yourself as to I got this all on my own, that I'm doing it on my own strength, on my own, in my own way, and on my own time, and forgetting who's ultimately responsible for making the moves and setting the pathways. And so even in that situation, you leaned on God, you called out for a miracle, and God pulled it through. I mean, and for people who don't understand this, it's one of those things that it's sometimes hard to put into words. It's one of those moments like you only know when you know. Like you have to go through it to really experience it. But sharing your story like this is so powerful because I would hope that for those who are listening, they're going to have an opportunity to understand that, with God, anything is possible. And even when all of the circumstances, all of the facts involved seemed like it was a hopeless situation, you were doomed to be homeless, this was the end, you were behind on this money. Who is in this situation like this and then go to court, have them drop the whole debt altogether? Then, oh, just by the way, there just happens to be this organization who just happens to help people just like you in your exact situation. You're able to find housing cheaper than what you found before, able to get back on your feet and not have any, repercussions in terms of credit damage or anything like that. I mean, even like you said, even with money sitting there from your ex-husband on tax returns that could have been filed, that you could have been saved from it. And you posed a good question to him. You would rather see your family I know we didn't work out, but you'd rather see us potentially be homeless than to file those returns, all because you don't want us to get money that you're never going to get the money, but you'd rather let it stay there instead of us benefit from it. But see, again, that relationship with God makes all the difference in the world, because he's not going to let one of his own suffer. He's not going to let one of his own be consumed by a storm of life. And your story is a perfect example of how God just navigates that thing, even when it seems to be insurmountable. He shows you just how big of a God he really is. So I thank you so much for sharing that. That's a very, very powerful testimony in the midst of what was otherwise, I'm pretty sure, a very difficult and challenging time. But yet again, another opportunity for God to show out and just let you know just who's running the show. So thank you for sharing that. That being said, I'm curious to know, as you reflect back on the story that you shared with us just now, as well as just adversity in general, um, what would you say is sort of your go-to routine, your go-to regiment that you like to rely upon when you find yourself in a moment where, okay, I got this adversity in front of me. This is what I like to do. This is sort of my process that I like to go through that kind of helps me, instead of allowing that situation to get the best of me. These are the things that I tend to do to kind of work through those situations so that I am able to withstand the storm and eventually get through it. What seems to be the things that have worked for you over your life?
Back in Oak Park, I had a prayer closet, and
Okay.
I would just go in there and just be on my knees crying out to God for hours. And so I would, and now I'll just like lay in my bed and just stay there all day and just cry and ask God for help and worship, sing songs to Him, and just pour it out to Him. And I'm like, God, I need your intervention. Like, I can't do this on my own. And so anyway, so I just try to release that to him, because there's so many times when I face hardships, or when I have since I got divorced, where I was just like, God, I feel like I'm cursed. I felt like if I stood in the marriage, I was doomed and my children were suffering. And then when I left it, I still was suffering and struggling, and they were suffering, from not having a father. And so anyway, I just felt like either way. So it's like, I just always had to cry out to him and be like, God, I don't understand. And, I know you have a plan. I don't know exactly how this is all going to turn out, but I trust you. And then he was always so faithful that, like, the next day or something, he would send like a friend or a prophet or somebody to me to give me a message, not knowing anything that I was going through. They would give me a word that was exactly what I needed, what I was going through, what God was about to do. And so it's like he always came through with that hope. So it's like the Bible that says, the scripture that says that weeping may endure for the night, but joy comes in the morning. And so that has always been my experience, that he always pulls me right out of it, and his answer comes in the morning. And I might be sad for that whole day, but he's never allowed me to like stay in that depression, and he's always shown himself faithful. So I
That's
love to
awesome.
just cry in his presence, and I love to sing, and I love to dance and just worship. And then I have a declaration book by Dr. Cindy Trim that I've been doing for the past several years. And so I'll pick up that book and I just start declaring, because I was like, I can't beg God, because he already did everything for us. He did a finished work on the cross. And so he says that I've given you all power and authority in my name. And so I was like, okay, so I have to command and put my angels to use and speak his word back to him, and not just sit there and be like, oh God, please, begging him for what he's already done, but instead be like, your word says this, and you cannot fail, and you cannot lie, and just commanding blessings and calling in money. Like, oh my God, so many times, like when the shutdown happened, the pandemic, everything shut down in March. And so at the time I was like, I was selling bridal gowns on the weekends, so I was making just commission, and then my credit card business is just commission. So anyway, so I couldn't work anymore, either of those businesses, and so I had no income, and so I started doing Dr. Cindy Trim's book and just going out on prayer walks. And I was like, I command my what was it, my June and July rent to be paid in the name of Jesus. I just call in the money, and as soon as I made that declaration, my building manager calls me, and she's like, Monica, there's this organization, another place that is giving out money to help people pay their rent during the pandemic. And so they're like, so she's like, just send me over these couple documents. I sent them immediately right over to her, and they paid 2 months of my rent. And I was like, I just spoken and commanded my rent to be paid, and then boom. And then when those 2 months ran out, I needed one more month. So then I was like, God, I command one more month. And so that organization, I reached out to them. I asked them if there was any more funds, and they're like, oh yeah. So they paid my August rent. And so I started seeing the power of commanding. And I saw that when there were times that I was in need and I needed like to pay a cell phone bill or a light bill, I would just be like, okay, I command a check for $200 to be in my mailbox in Jesus' name. And then boom, I'd go to the mailbox and that check was there. And so it's like, I saw that it worked when we command, that God, He does it for us. So that's what I
Wow.
do.
That's awesome. I mean, and I think that the important distinction here that you made was that I don't beg. I basically I believe. I
Hmm.
believe in His word. I believe that He's there for me when I need Him, in whatever way that is that He shows up. But
Hmm.
nevertheless, I'm not sitting here begging and pleading because I don't have to. His, like I said, His word is true. His word is solid. His word is pure. I can just call on that and then sit back and let God do what do the thing that He does. And that those examples that you just shared are perfect in alignment with that. And of course, just because I'm also connected with you, via social media, I also know that prayer and singing and worship, that's something that you do just in general. So you're not just waiting until you're in a jam to say you love God. You're not just waiting until you're in a fix before you honor and acknowledge who He is and what He means to you, which is so important for people to understand as well. Because when you're going through your storms of life, you don't wait until the storm is here. It's a constant, ongoing preparation. We celebrate in our good moments as well as in our bad moments, but it should be a continual thing so that when those bad moments or those difficult moments do come, we're already set up to be okay. We'll have our initial response to it, whether it's tears, whether it's anger, whether it's frustration. But the worry part of it, the stress part of it, the more you do what you spoke of, the less of that is in existence because you already know it's going to get taken care of. All I have to do is speak on God's word, pray to Him, and let it go, to release it to Him, and let Him be in control of it all. So I love that. I love that what you said there. If you had an opportunity to speak to younger Monica, I say Monica from 20, 30 years ago, just be able to tell her, after the things that you've been through, the things that you've learned, the experiences that you have, what would be your words of wisdom to her as well as to anybody who might be listening that just needs some encouragement in terms of, what do I do when I'm going through difficult times? Whether it's similar to your situation or if it's something completely different, what would be those words that you would have for those individuals, as well as, like I said, the younger version of you? What would you say?
Hmm. Good question. I guess I would say that one, to not allow people to disrespect you, and because people only do what you allow them to do. And so, like, I allowed too many years of abuse, just always believing that it would get better. And, especially because God told me to marry him. So I was just trying to obey him and to stay in that. But anyway, I learned that I couldn't permit that because I wasn't respecting myself. And so my children saw that I wasn't, or they perceived it as me not respecting myself. So I would say to walk away, or if someone does something or says something to you that doesn't sit well or offends you, to just go to them and just to do it in a loving, calm way, not with an attitude, but just bring it to their attention. Because then once you check them, they're either gonna take a step back, and then you think about how they're gonna proceed in the future, or they're gonna just not have a relationship with you anymore. Like, one of the two is going to happen. But just to not permit that disrespect. The other thing is just to, the only way to get like self assurance, because I was very insecure in my 20s and 30s. It's probably from not having a father, and then having a toxic husband, not really having like that genuine love from a man or a father figure or a husband. So I found that my identity was just in Christ. And so I had to learn to rest in that and just be like, see what the Bible says about me, that I'm fearfully and wonderfully made, that I'm the apple of my Father's eye, and just really grasp that that you're a daughter of God, or you're a son of God, and that He's your father. And so I really had to embrace that, even though I didn't have a natural father, that God is my heavenly Father, and that He's perfect and He won't fail me. And so I would just tell my younger self just to really hold on to those two things and to really pursue those two things.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Like I said, boundaries are everything, and as the saying goes, we teach people how to treat us, and
Mm-hmm.
so that's very powerful that you shared that. All right, all right. Well, before we let you go, I do want to, of course, take a time out. This is a part of the show that we like to, we want to make sure that we celebrate you. We want to make sure that we affirm you, acknowledge you. So tell us, Monica, what exciting things you have going on, coming up, working on project wise, anything like that that we can just love on you on right now. Tell us about it.
I appreciate that. I wrote a book called The Unfolding, and I wrote a couple ebooks as well to go along with it. One on inner healing, because I've, constantly having to do a work of inner healing. And then another book on dreams and how to interpret them. Because I was inspired to write my story called The Unfolding because my mother, split up with my father at 8, but then years later, in 2001, I'm still married, I'm a Christian. God gives me a dream, and this woman named Cheryl Brady, who's a minister, I think, under T.D. Jakes' ministry. She's an amazing woman, but in this dream, Cheryl Brady is telling me that I'm adopted. And in the dream, I'm talking to the black side of my family, my grandmother and my aunts, on the south side. And I'm asking them, am I adopted? And they're like, no, of course not. That's ridiculous. No. And I was like, yeah, but my sister and I, we have different types of bodies, different hair textures, like we look alike, but there's still some differences. And they're like, no, 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 that's ridiculous. But then in the dream, my grandmother she took me away from the family and took me underneath the staircase that went down to her basement. And she was about to tell me something. And then, boom, I wake up from this dream. And so I wake up from the dream. And so then I was like, oh. So I tell my mother the dream. And at this point, my mom's a Christian now. She got saved a few years after I did. And I tell my mom the dream. And then my mom was just like, oh, we're on the phone. And she's like, oh. And I was like, what? And I was like, she's like, well, you're not adopted, but I was like, but what? I was like, what? My dad's not my dad. She's like, my mom was just calling. That's hilarious. I'm telling the story. So she's like, no, your dad's not your dad. I was with another man, and when I met your dad, I was already pregnant with you, and him and I decided that we would never tell you, and that he would raise you, and he would be your dad, and that was it. And I was like, what? So I was like, my whole life, I believed a lie, that this man that didn't support me and take care of me after the age of 8, I was like, he wasn't even my real father. And that explained why his mother was always so mean to me, because they knew that
Wow.
I wasn't really his child. So anyway, so from 2001, I go on this journey to find my real father. And my mom didn't know much about him, because she was 16 when she met him. She got pregnant, and she just said he wasn't a good guy. He was on the other side of the law, but she wouldn't tell. And all she knew was his name, and that he had family from Mississippi, even though she met him in Uptown, like the north side of Chicago. And that was it. So I go on this journey from 2001 to 2004, writing letters and calling all the people, because his name is James Merriweather. And so I'm calling up all the Merriweathers, in the phone book. And at the time I worked at a bank, so I looked at all the Merriweathers that had bank accounts and mortgages with us. And I'm just calling up everybody, trying to find if anyone knows him. And so I give up in 2004, but then fast forward to 2010, this young lady that I meet, she not that I meet, that I went to elementary school with, but she moved away to Paris when she was 12. So we lost touch. So she finds me on Facebook, even though I had a married name of Rodriguez. So she finds me on Facebook. I go to her house. I tell her my story, how I'm looking for my dad, blah, blah, blah. And she tells me, well, my mother-in-law is a private detective. She can find anybody. And I was like, what? And this is literally 9 years later. At this point, I gave up. I was just like, oh, well, I don't think I'm going to find him. And so anyway, so I give her his name, and she calls me up and she's like, Monica, there's like 50 men that are named James Merriweather that are in that age range that I was guessing, because I knew he was probably about 8 years older than my mom. So I was like, or somewhere around there. So anyway, she's like, it's $50 per search. There's about 50 men. What do you want me to do? And I was like, uh-oh, I don't have 50 times 50 money, you know? So then all of a sudden, I'm in the car talking on the phone with this woman, and all of a sudden, God drops this thought in my head, and he tells me, look for a man with a November birthday, because he's born the same month as me. I'm November. So all of a sudden, I just knew he was November, and I knew that he was an artist because I'm artistic with drawing and all of that. So I knew that he was an artist because my mom's not. So I had to have gotten it from him. So anyway, I just had like that knowledge, word of. I look for this one man. So anyway, it turns out to be him. And she's like, I found him. She's like, but Monica, I don't know if you want to meet this man. He has this really extensive criminal record. And so, can you see me?
Yeah, I can still see you. You just went sideways. But you can keep going.
Hello?
Yep, there you
I
go.
lost you. Yeah, yeah.
That's
So,
okay.
so anyway, she's like, he's got a really bad record. So anyway, I was like, well, is it child molestation, murder, or rape, or something really bad? She's like, no, it was like robbery and armed robbery in the 70s and 80s and 90s. So then I was like, okay, well, robbery's not so bad. I was like, maybe he changed and gave his life to God or something, because this was years ago. And I was like, if God told me in a dream, revealed to me about my real father, then I figured there was a point that I needed to meet him. So anyway, so I call him up, and I meet him like the next day. And so anyway, so I write this whole book about it called The Unfolding, where it just covers my, me meeting my father, how I met him, and the things that I went through as a mixed person, and as a growing up in a single family home, just kind of just telling my whole story up until the point that I meet my father. And so it was just called The Unfolding because it's like this whole story was unfolding, and I had to find out like why my mom never told me about him and who he was, and just the whole story, and how my whole identity was like a lie, and I was devastated, and just the whole process of going through that. Um, and so anyway, so then I also wrote some ebooks, because I was like, well, God always speaks to me in dreams, and I write them down, I pray, and I ask him like what the interpretations are. And so I wrote some books just to help other people, that if they do dream, that it's just a guide to teach like about, the history of dreams in the Bible versus what the different types of dreams and how to interpret them and all of that. So that's what I've worked on over the past year, and I'm in the process of releasing it. And I've just been praying about, do I do the ebooks first, and build, like, help people with healing and with dream interpretations, and then release the book. Because with the book writing program that we went through, I was trying to create packages to sell, and I was going to sell them all as a package. But then I was like, well, it might be smarter to do the ebooks and help people along the way, and then have them read my actual story. So that's the exciting thing that I'm praying about, how exactly to launch it and when to launch it, because I really want it to be the right way, and I want it to be impactful, and I don't want it just to be like a flop where you're like, oh, I wrote a book, everybody wrote a book, and then nothing really comes of it after a few friends and family buy it. you know.
Right, right. And I'm glad you shared that, because it is really important that when you have a powerful story like that, especially when it's a personal, you want
Hmm.
to do it the right way. I went through the same thought process in putting out my book. I was like, I knew a lot of people who wrote books, but I
Hmm.
didn't want to just have it to be just something that I was checking off the bucket list. I wanted it to be, again, right timing, right presentation, all of those things. So it's just one of those things that and what you're already doing is you just let God lead you,
Hmm.
in terms of, just the appropriate way to put that out there. And I'm pretty sure, I have no doubt, just from what you shared about the story, that this is going to be a powerful message behind that. So that is awesome, and we definitely celebrate that. We're excited to for the release, and definitely when it does come out officially, I'm definitely going to make sure we get you back on here, to build upon that book and kind of dig deep into it a little bit further. So that's awesome. I'm really happy for you in that regard. So,
Thank you, thank you.
all right, all right. Well, that brings our podcast to a close. It has been a pleasure, a privilege to have you, Monica, grace us with your presence.
Thank you.
It has been definitely a treat, to get to know you much better, and just sharing your journey. Again, appreciate your transparency, and your willingness to be open. I know on a platform like this, it's not easy to do this type of thing. And you had shared with me earlier that this was something that was a little bit new for you to do. So I thank you so much for that. And as I shared with you before, this is going to bless somebody. So I pray that anybody who's having an opportunity to listen to this, that there's some nuggets that were dropped throughout the podcast that is going to make life a little bit easier for you, kind of help explain things as to why we go through what we go through. Because as when it comes to storms, it's not a matter of if, but when. But it's how do we respond to those storms? Do we allow ourselves to get consumed by it, or are we going to look for a way to leverage those moments, and more importantly, leverage them in knowing who to lock up with? Which in this case, as we've been talking throughout, you got to do it with God. It's the way to go, because when you try to do it on your own, that's when you stress yourself out. That's when you overburden yourself, because you're literally attempting to lift weights that were never meant for you to pick up. So I definitely appreciate you sharing that. It has been a treat and a pleasure. If you've enjoyed the content that has been shared today on our podcast, please subscribe, please share, please like, please comment. Tell everybody about it. This is what we're all about here, encouraging and empowering and uplifting everybody that has an opportunity to listen to what we have to share on our show. So with that said, here at the Blessings in the Street podcast, always remember that your story is your glory, your relationships are relevant, and your journey is your joy. So until next time, be blessed, take care of yourself, and we'll see you next time.